Good evening, everybody. 6 o'clock. We're going to get started. If I can ask for the panelists to have a seat. So just for housekeeping, for the panelists, there's a speak button on the panel in front of you with a microphone. When you turn that on, it should turn red, and then you'll be live. So just FYI. First off, good evening to everybody. Thank you for making the time this evening, both the panelists as well as the members of the public, to discuss the IH 345 public panel discussion, project considerations and overview. My name is Robert Bettis. I'm an assistant city manager over infrastructure. This evening, as part of the agenda, you'll get a brief welcome from the panel members. We're going to do a project overview and comments from city staff. We'll then have comments from our partners from TxDOT, as well as from the North Central Texas Council of Governments. You'll hear from city staff from a number of departments, and then we'll have some specific questions to the panel members, and then we'll open up for public questions. We do have some folks who sent in questions, but we will have some time if folks have comments or questions from the floor. After the public Q&A session, we will then talk about next steps and close out the meeting. So as mentioned, we do have a very diverse panel here. Before we get to the panel members, I do want to acknowledge our city council members who are here with us this evening, starting with Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Narvaez, Councilmember Paul Ridley, Councilmember Janie Schultz, Councilmember Moreno, Councilman Atkins, and I believe I saw Councilmember Mendelson as well. Thank you all for your time this evening as well. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the panel for introductions. We'll go from left to right, and then we'll go from there. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Terrence Maiden. I'm the CEO of Russell Glenn. We're a Dallas-based real estate development firm. Thanks.
Evan Sheets, Vice President, Planning and Policy, Downtown Dallas, Inc.
Kevin Spath, Assistant Director with the City's Office of Economic Development.
Patrick Kennedy, Urban Planner and Designer, Space Between Design Studio. I also teach Sustainable Urban Development at SMU, and I'm on the board of Dallas Area Rapid Transit.
Julia Ryan, Director of Planning and Urban Design for the City of Dallas.
Catherine Cuellar, Director of Communications, Outreach, and Marketing for the City of Dallas.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Keller-Hudeberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Deep Ellum Foundation. We oversee the Deep Ellum Public Improvement District.
Good evening. My name is Gus Concarley. I'm the Director of the Department of Transportation for the City of Dallas.
Jack Matthews, Matthews Southwest.
Susan Clemens, TxDOT.
Michael Morris, North Central Texas COG.
John Jenkins, Dallas Parks and Recreation.
Kay Shelton, Vice President, Capital Planning for DART.
David Noguera, Director of Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization, here with the City of Dallas.
Thank you all. Dr. Perez, please start us off with an overview of the project.
So this evening, we're here to share some keynotes on the IH 345 feasibility study that was conducted by TxDOT. You're going to hear this evening City of Dallas considerations of the various options that have been presented. We'll have a summary and then talk about next steps. So just a matter of notes, IH 345, 1.4-mile elevated 6-lane structure was built in 1973. It is classified as an urban highway with a speed limit of 65 miles an hour, posted speed limit. It connects North and South Dallas between I-45 and US 75. It also provides east-west connections to I-30 and Woodall Rogers. At last vehicle counts that were presented, it supports 180,000 vehicles per day. The feasibility study, this last feasibility study was completed by TxDOT in coordination with the City of Dallas. It was conducted between April 2018 and October 2022 at a cost of $7 million. The purpose of the feasibility study was to develop options for the future alternatives for IH 345. And the goals of the feasibility study included use of previous studies such as the 2016 city map, They also wanted to ensure an inclusive and transparent public involvement process, and at the end, provide the best solution that maintains safety, mobility, and operability. The IH-345 feasibility study incorporated data and plans such as a 2013 IH-345 feasibility study. They also looked at current projects such as the I-30 Canyon project, which is depicted here in the schematic. This is being done in conjunction with the new convention center that will be coming online. TxDOT also looked at the DART D2 study, SM Wright project, as-built plans, and also looked at City of Dallas Vision Zero plans, as well as Downtown Dallas Inc.'s 360 plan. Some of the things that we noted from the study, while the projections from 2019 were 180,000 vehicles per day, it's estimated to increase to 206,000 vehicles per day by 2045. Within the environmental project area, which is about 0.2 miles in each direction of the study of 345, approximately 49% of the total population was comprised of minorities, and approximately 34% of the total population had a median income of $27,750. To ensure public involvement through this process, TxDOT had a very extensive public involvement plan, included multiple stakeholder meetings, newsletters, and coordination between the NCT COG, DART, and City of Dallas. And the TxDOT team also spent over 160 hours with over 100 stakeholders in 104 separate meetings. Given the feasibility study's goals and intent, TxDOT identified five options for IH-345 to include the no-build or as-is, a depressed or below-grade, removal, boulevard, elevated, and a refined hybrid. The refined hybrid is a TxDOT recommendation. So for the City of Dallas, the feasibility study was briefed to Transportation Committee in June of 2022, and then also to City Council in October 2022. Furthermore, there was a resolution of support that was brought to Council in February of this year. We were asked to delay that resolution so that we could have additional stakeholder input, such as this evening, as well as for more city departments to look into the study and provide comments. During the October 2022 briefing, a number of questions came up to include the legal implications of removing I-345, further details on the cost for the boulevard or parallel thoroughfare street plan and what were the funding options, the cost for looking at any warranted grade separations that may result from the DART green line crossings, and then also what was the City of Dallas's financial and land use plans for any surplus right-of-way that would become available adjacent to IH-345. So we went through the study and looked at some of the items through the various options. I guess from a fiscal perspective, one of the things that we noted was that many of either the no-build leave as or the depressed or at grade or below grade or the elevated, those construction costs would be absorbed by TxDOT. There were numbers of acres of potential surplus that came from a depressed or below grade option, and also from an elevated option. We did note that from the city's perspective, the right-of-way, the surplus right-of-way or debt caps that may become possible through these options would have to be funded by the City of Dallas. So for instance, the depressed or below grade option, if the city were to purchase the right-of-way, would cost somewhere between 47 and 82 million. That's based upon TxDOT's best use appraisal, and then also based upon just for reference, I think there was a purchase of some right-of-way associated with the convention center. I believe it came in at about $310 a square foot or close to that. So those were some of the things that we looked at in the no-build leave as, depressed, below grade, and the elevated options. Next slide. For some of the benefits and challenges for the removal or boulevard, this would, I guess from a benefit, provided the greatest number of acres of any option, a little over 25 acres of surplus right-of-way that could become available. However, this was also the only option that the City of Dallas would be responsible for funding the construction. If you look at the feasibility study, it references a cost of about $400 million for construction of this option. However, we would also have to take into consideration the actual purchase of the right-of-way. We would have to take into consideration potential dark grade separations of the green line. And aside from the financial cost, there's a number of, challenges that we would have to go through to include Federal Highway Administration and Texas Transportation Commission approval to actually deauthorize IH 345 from the federal highway system. The governor of Texas actually has to approve that, and then also the U.S. Secretary of Transportation. This is definitely an option that would take some time. And then lastly, this may result in challenges to Title VI. These legal issues would be determined by the Department of Justice, which could potentially affect the potential for any state or federal highway or state or federal grants that may become available. Next slide. The refined hybrid, from our perspective, gives a good balance between all of the options. This provides about 8.7 acres of right-of-way or surplus right-of-way, and the potential for almost 10 acres of debt capping. For this option, the City of Dallas could purchase that right-of-way for about between $76 million to $133 million, and then fund the debt caps of about $295 million. This would also would probably be supported by state and federal dollars as well. In summary, for any of the redevelopment options, the City of Dallas would have to complete a market study to determine best use of surplus right-of-way or the debt caps, whether it be for commercial use, housing, parks, or et cetera. We would have to identify the funding for that, and it could be a combination of future bond funds. Just lost the screen. Future bond funds, public-private partnerships, or available grants. Construction of all redevelopment options would be absorbed by TxDOT, other than the removal or the boulevard option. And then the removal boulevard option is the only option that presents state and federal processes that would have to be completed and could potentially have Title VI challenges, which could limit available grant funds. As far as next steps, we definitely want to hear the panel's feedback this evening. We'd like to answer any questions and hear feedback from the public as well. We do plan to brief the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on May 15th and full City Council on May 17th, after which we would seek approval of a resolution of support for the refined hybrid option from Mayor and Council on May 24th.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Susan Clemens to talk about the TxDOT view and recommendations, including what elements TxDOT considered and how that led to your recommendation of the refined hybrid option, please. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. TxDOT actually started studying Interstate 345 back in 2012, but the most common study that folks refer to is our city map study. So with the city map study, it was really looking at the art of the possible. We looked at 4 different alternatives. One was the no build, leave it as is. Another was build it below grade. Another was reconstructed elevated but modify the ramps. And then we looked at the boulevard option. At the conclusion of city map, we did not make any recommendations. Essentially, we said, here's the art of the possible. You need to go study it even further. And so that's exactly what we did with the 345 feasibility study. Next slide. What we learned from city map was the main goals: mobility, connectivity, sustainability, and economic development. With city map in the feasibility study, we wanted to carry those goals forward. And so that's essentially the basis of the feasibility study is how do we find an alternative that really meets all of those goals? Next slide. So with that, we went out to the public. We had 3 public meetings. The first one was really, what do you want us to study? Was city map a good starting place? We heard that it was, and so we went and took those alternatives and studied those further. We had 2 more rounds of public meetings. We received almost 3,000 surveys, just under 3,000 surveys, with over 10,000 people viewing our public website. So really got a lot of feedback from the public and the stakeholders. Next slide. What we heard, common themes amongst really all of the comments. Community cohesion, impacts to access between South Dallas and North Dallas, traffic concerns, economic development potential, as well as pedestrian safety. So with that, we looked at each alternative. We sat down, next slide, with the City of Dallas. We had 23 meetings with City of Dallas staff, not just with the Transportation Department. We met with various departments within the city organization. We met with city council members 16 times. We offered each council member a one-on-one discussion, not only on what we were going to study, what they thought was important, and then we had 73 individual one-on-one stakeholder meetings throughout the process. Next slide. That happened throughout the 3 to 4 year study. You can see kind of just the number of meetings that we had. We met with DART, we met with the COG, we met with just about anybody who wanted to talk about 345 throughout the course of the feasibility study. Next slide. With that, we heard that we needed to not just look at traffic. This project was more than just about looking at traffic. It was how we move vehicles, how do we move pedestrians, how do we move bicycles. Transit was incorporated as well. Really connectivity, and a lot of times people think connectivity is just the connectivity of the freeways. No, we looked at the connectivity of the city streets, the local roads, how do you get in and out of the area, and that connectivity was not just vehicles, it was also bicycles and pedestrians. D2 was in there, we met with DART several times. So really, how do we make sure that we're meeting the connectivity needs? Then we also looked at sustainability. So how do we make sure that this project is going to last and be sustainable throughout, because it's a once-in-a-generation project. We're going to rebuild this, and it's going to be there for a long time. So we looked at potential surplus right-of-way. We looked at parks that occur today adjacent to the freeway, as well as there are some park uses that are currently using the TxDOT right-of-way. We've been very open that potentially one day we could need that area. So really looked at how the project would impact the community. And then we also looked at economic development. What are the different potentials for each one of the alternatives? How is that going to impact the future? And with that, every bit of that went into our decision. We worked hand in hand with city staff to really look at what those metrics were, what made sense for each alternative. So really not just looking at traffic, we looked at a number of things to come up with our recommended alignment. Next slide. I don't expect any of you to read this, but this is really the evaluation matrix. It is available on our website, and we really quantified what we thought each one of these elements that we evaluated, how it worked with each alternative. And so these are the metrics that we use. This has all been on our website since last year, and this is how we came to our decision. Next slide. And with that, as Robert said, our preferred alternative is the hybrid alternative. Essentially, we can maintain those goals that we heard from the public. We're going to maintain that connectivity from South to North Dallas. We're going to create the complete streets with the city streets going over the freeway, so we can make that a more inviting feeling as you cross the freeway. Just like we did with Southern Gateway, just like we did with the Canyon, and we're doing with East Corridor. We're going to sit down with city staff. We're going to sit down with the local stakeholders and really look to see what those city and local thoroughfare streets should look like. And we're committing to build those across the freeway. Next slide. This is just a graphic of what it will look like. We're still early on in the process. We've essentially narrowed it down to one alternative, but we've worked closely with Deep Ellum and DDI. We still have some refinements to make. We need to make sure that the ramping is where it needs to be. Again, if we need to make modifications to those city streets as it crosses the freeway, there's still time to do that. So although we've completed the feasibility study, our next step is really to go into the schematic and environmental process, and that's where we can really start making modifications to city streets or ramping and tweak that to meet the needs of all of the stakeholders. But it's been a very collaborative process with the various city departments as well as the stakeholders, and that's really, it wasn't just TxDOT making a decision. We came to that decision after meeting with various stakeholders.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Michael Morris from TxDOT to please provide their consideration and comments on the project. Thank you, sir.
Madam Communication Director, thank you very much. I think what we're doing here tonight is important, but my heart is sickened by what happened in Allen, Texas, and in the southern part of the state with individuals waiting at a transit stop. We all have to move on, but our world we live in is getting more and more complicated, so my heart goes out to those communities. I have a special plea for all of us tonight, and it's to create a partnership to rally around TxDOT's hybrid option and to pull together as a team and start working on these refinements that Season is looking for and find a strategy for TxDOT to buy and sell this right away, not just on 345, but on I-30, because we have surplus property on both, and create a balance between mobility, economic development, and the future of the inner core of the city. And my plea is to all of us as professionals, community leaders, advocates, urban advocates, housing advocates, and my plea is to Blackman and Schultz and Mendelssohn and Atkins and Narvaez to pull us together because when we have this amount of money sitting in Washington, you make hay while the sun shines, and this is a great opportunity, in my opinion, to do that. The second point I would like to make, I have only 3 points. Even though 345 is important, it's a system. And I need to walk you through this. So if you've just been focused on 345, you're going to miss the whole play. You're focused on one act of a 2-day play. We've replaced SM Wright Freeway and substituted a smart street, the first smart street in our region. We extended US 175 and eliminated Dead Man's Corner. Interstate 30 between 35E and 45 is funded, ready to go to construction. Someone with us tonight is building a building over Interstate 30. We worked hard to extend pedestrian cap at the convention center. And we're reconnecting Old City Park to Farmers Market with another pedestrian cap that we call Three Fingers Plus. We worked closely with DART to realign D2 and get D2 out of the Deep Ellum community. We're proposing tonight to put 345 below grade. We're proposing to put Fair Park I-30 below grade. Now just imagine for a moment you can go from Fair Park with no elevated structure both on I-30 and 345. So we create this partnership, hopefully tonight, to advance 345 and work with the City of Dallas to advance the right-of-way to maximize the economic development. The citizens of Dallas have 2 great bookend improvements with the Convention Center on the west and Fair Park on the east. Our office in the spring advanced the construction of Fair Park Links. When I came to the region in 1979, there was a vision to connect downtown to Fair Park. We have dusted that off and are working with the community to reconnect that with a series of ribbons, bike ped, goods movement, thoroughfare streets, and transit. We also had our community meetings to resize Garland Road from 3G to Interstate 30. We are proposed to fund the infrastructure improvements in the new infrastructure bill. Money from our board, the Regional Transportation Council, money from TxDOT and the Texas Transportation Commission, and with the City of Dallas focused on the right-of-way fund to advance, hopefully, a depressed hybrid 345. Now, I want you to have a juxtaposition of this system versus a roadway that's going to carry 180,000 cars. It's not going to be there anymore. That freeway carries 80% more than the average freeway in the region. The average freeway in the region carries 100,000 cars a day. 345 sitting at 180. So it's not a typical freeway. It's 180,000 vehicles per day. You got individuals wishing to go to the emergency room service at Baylor. You got pedestrians who want to go east-west, now being traversed by 100,000 plus vehicles a day. I question the safety of that for our pedestrians, which was a major factor in the original study. And I don't know how you do economic development if the purpose of these thoroughfare streets is no longer access to land, and now the purpose of the street overnight turns into throughput, when we don't need these thoroughfare links as throughput, because that throughput can be conducted on a depressed 345. So what's the third point? The third point is really the second point. Because of the vision that's been created, the Regional Transportation Council, my policy body, not one person in 40 years has come to me on my board, hey, I think that thoroughfare street is a really good idea. So the Regional Transportation Council is responsible for the federal transportation plan. It would never support the thoroughfare street. As a result, you can't get federal funds. You can't get federal funds from us. You couldn't get federal funds in a discretionary grant program under the infrastructure program. Why? Because the first question the feds ask is that project in the regional transportation plan? And the answer would be no, it's not in the regional transportation plan. I've heard from season before, TxDOT won't even put this on their agenda at the commission to take down 345. I don't believe the city of Dallas has the money to build a thoroughfare street of this magnitude, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. As was said earlier, Dr. Perez mentioned, if 345 is coming off of the interstate highway system, you need the approval of state government and you need the approval of federal government. You're going to get neither. The other thing that's pretty clear is you're going to have, as these volumes cross the green line, you're going to have to work with DART and check the warrants of what a grade separation over the green line is. I think that would look pretty ugly in Deep Ellum, building thoroughfare street grade separations over the green line as a way to maintain north-south movement on these traffic streets, because the train is going to be blocking the cars as the frequency of service occurs on the green line. And the most important part for me is you have disparate impacts. The people of color in the southern sector and the low-income people, more so in the southern sector, desperately use this roadway to get to their jobs every single day. And our office has to balance the benefits and burdens of every transportation decision, and there's no way we could do it with a thoroughfare street. So my plea to the group in my final remarks, can we come together today, rally around what is a brilliant proposed strategy by TxDOT in a hybrid option, and maximize the economic development now that all that through traffic could occur underground, reknit the thoroughfare streets, and maximize those elements. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I would like to ask my peer directors to each take a couple of minutes to discuss the potential outcomes and impacts, starting with our Planning and Urban Design Director, Julia Ryan.
Good evening. My role as Chief Planning Officer per the City Charter is to advise the City Manager on matters affecting the urban design and physical development of the city. The area in question is the urban core of the 9th largest city in the country, and urban design, transportation, and land uses should be reflective of this. Careful integration of context sensitivity is critical, given its location in the heart of our urban core, and how well we design a replacement facility, regardless of what option is built, will have far-reaching impacts, both positive and negative, beyond its traffic or transportation function for many decades. As we all know, the original construction of this roadway had detrimental effects on the surrounding African American community. Urban freeways constructed across the country during this time have had similar outcomes in communities of color that must be acknowledged and is part of this process. The City of Dallas does not have an adopted plan or recommendations surrounding the ultimate configuration of 345, outside of a statement in the Downtown 360 plan to advance reconstruction of 345 in an urban format to reconnect downtown with East Dallas and Deep Ellum, and to open up opportunities for development of workforce housing on excess land, and also to investigate the near-term removal of TxDOT ramps at Live Oak and Field Streets in coordination with D2 implementation. The city does not have an adopted future land use plan that sets a vision for the development or redevelopment around the structure. Planning and Urban Design has worked closely with the Department of Transportation staff in reviewing urban design throughout the process, and we will continue to work across disciplines to advocate for good design principles, complete and context-sensitive roadways, and appropriate land use considerations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I would like to call on the Assistant Director of Economic Development, Kevin Spath.
Thank you. You know, the Office of Economic Development here in the city is primarily tasked with implementation of somebody else's plans. So if there were to be any surplus properties acquired through any of the alternatives, our office would be looking to what Julia's department is doing in terms of figuring out what to do with that property. There's lots of due diligence activities that need to occur. You know, stuff like infrastructure. Is there infrastructure support to the properties that would become available? And what does that cost? What's the zoning? Do we have to go through a rezoning process as a public developer of this property? Access, configuration of these parcels. Are they developable? You know, what's the market demand for different types of development? We would assume they would be mixed use, mixed income, but we really don't know what the demand and the absorption of those uses would be, especially 5, 6, 7, 10 years out into the future. Are there structural limitations about how to develop on top of a cap and what densities could be developed on top of a cap? So these are all the questions that would need to be answered, frankly, before our office could really get into high gear on implementing a plan and facilitating development on property that the city would become owners of. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I would like to invite our Housing Director, David Noguera, to speak. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. You know, I was commenting to Michael Morris last week that I've only been exposed to this for the last 15 minutes, while he's been working on this for the last 15 years. I've had a little bit more time since that initial conversation to look at this, and a few things sort of jump out to me. Right? You heard Julia before comment about communities that have been disconnected by the freeways, and there's been historic examples of that happening in the city. So here it is, we have an opportunity to reconnect them. How we do that is up for debate, right? I believe that the hybrid option does offer a way to integrate that. One of the other things that really stands out to me is the importance of leveraging additional funds. As many of you know, when you're developing affordable housing, it's no different than developing market rate housing, but you typically have a gap that you have to fill with some other sources of funding. So when we look at dollars coming from the feds, when we look at dollars coming from TxDOT, when we look at dollars coming from the COG, those are dollars that we want to be able to utilize. And the question is, how do we put ourselves in the position to do that? So that when we're coming before the city manager and we're coming before the city council looking for funding to carry out our projects, we're not taking a go-it-alone approach. Because that approach typically doesn't get us very far, particularly when the needs that we have for housing far exceed the resources that we have for housing. So, you know, I think you've heard a lot of comments already about the pros and cons of these different approaches. And from a housing perspective, you know, I like to take the Barnacle approach. All right, I want to latch on to an effort that's already underway and ride it as far as it'll take us, particularly when it comes to developing more housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, from Park and Recreation, John Jenkins.
As far as the Parks Department, my only position, or the Parks Department position, is we're open to any plan that doesn't negatively impact current park space, and we're open to any plan that maximizes future opportunities for park space.
Well, that got us back on schedule. Thank you, kind sir. And among my peer directors, I'll give the last to Gus Concarly, our Director of Transportation, please.
I may be able to help with that effort to stay on schedule. So, not much to add, just a few things as a reminder. A couple of years ago, the City of Dallas and City Council adopted the Strategic Mobility Plan, which is the first mobility plan for the City of Dallas. At its core was safety, equity, innovation, sustainability, economic vitality, and housing. Following that, there were several plans that have been adopted and or are in the works, including the plan for the Vision Zero, which would basically target the elimination of fatalities in the city, as well as severe accidents by 50% by 2030. All these things cannot happen without looking at the roadway system. And what we mean about roadway system includes the freeways as a complete and functioning system that would allow us address these issues. So we're following policies that were set by the council, and to achieve these policies, you have to look at the system functionality. So when I'm looking at this project, I'm looking at it also from not only just the 1.4 miles in the city of Dallas, on the eastern side of the city of Dallas, but I'm looking at it as what would that impact the economic vitality of the city of Dallas, at the local level, at the state level, because this is a key corridor that connects the Port of Houston up to Sherman, and we all know what's happening in Sherman as far as the chips manufacturing. So this is a key corridor that would allow us also the flexibility to have redundancy in the system. And one of the things that Mr. Morris did not mention, or one of the projects that could be impacted by the 345 is all the investments that we're making on Harry Hines and the Southwest Medical District, whereby if we're dumping more traffic on I-35, which it's already operating at capacity, then we are defeating the very same purpose of what we're trying to do on Harry Hines. Another example that would be impacted by it is what we're trying to do on Cesar Chavez. As a matter of fact, by the farmers market. Cesar Chavez is becoming like a highway, and what we're trying to do is slow down traffic and narrow it down and see what options that we have in order to help it out. All this to say is that we have to have a good functioning freeway system around the city, whether it be in I-30, I-45, I-345, Woodall-Rogers, and those have to be looked at as a system and how they integrate into what council has approved in the Strategic Mobility Plan and the Vision Zero. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to have a lightning round with a minute for each panelist, starting with Ms. Hudeberg and Deep Ellum Foundation, to talk about the key advantage and the key disadvantage to each option under consideration.
Thank you. At the Deep Ellum Foundation, there's no question for us, obviously, about the transformative power of the possible thoroughfare option. I will say there are some people in Deep Ellum who actually prefer we keep the highway. They like the distinctiveness that it allows our neighborhood to retain. That said, our board and our stakeholders have supported moving forward in refining the hybrid option. And I emphasize that word because I want to emphasize that we are not there yet. For us at the Deep Ellum Foundation, it's absolutely critical that we drill down and figure out how we're going to fund capping. This project does not work without capping and decking opportunities. It does not work without further development on pedestrian and multimodal connectivity between downtown and Deep Ellum. For us, we are a key visitor center for those coming from the convention center. We know that over 50% of our visitors to Deep Ellum are coming from outside of the area. And so for us at the foundation, it's critical that we move forward in refining these critical elements that will make or break the project. And with that, I think I'll relinquish my 1 minute.
Dr. Concarly, or do you want to skip over to Jack?
hate to jump in front of the line there. No, it's I think when you look at this, so backing up a bit, 345 has not been a pretty part of the city for a long time. There's a whole bunch of reasons you have to make changes. When you get to make a change, you want to make the right change. So we were part of city plan. We were part of various looks at this, even paid for a study to say, hey, what are the right things to do? And like any one thing you're going to develop, there's never one answer that makes everybody happy. But the hybrid solution, when I look at it, and I don't disagree, if you do the hybrid and you don't do any of the pieces on top of it, you've missed that opportunity. I don't think that's going to happen. We've had a good working relationship with TxDOT on doing things south of the convention center. That there's a will and there's a way, and it's not always easy, but you can get there if you work hard at it. So I think the hybrid solution at the end of the day is going to give almost everyone a better solution. People who like to go underneath the existing I-45, probably the only people who won't like what I'm saying. But other than that group, this is just a better outcome, and it's taken a lot of different pieces and a lot of different pushes. So as I always say, don't let great get in the way of good, but I think this is getting towards very good if we understand the capping. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but.
No, you did very well. Thank you, Councilor. To make sure that those who have not yet spoken, I'd like to next go to Kay Shelton with DART.
Thank you. I'll just really quickly say that from DART's perspective, we looked at it from a couple of different ways. One, wanted to make sure that the existing system that we have out there is kept whole and that we have the ability to enhance our operations over time. And then we also looked at it from the perspective of the D2 subway and making sure that was accommodated. And you heard from several panelists that we did work really closely with the Council of Governments, the City, and TxDOT to make sure that D2 works under the hybrid depressed option. And then for our existing system, I think everything works with that, all the different options. I think the one that we'd want to take more time to understand what the implications would be the option where the freeway would be removed and a boulevard would be put in place. Because we want to understand the queuing impacts and make sure there isn't, impacts to our system where we are creating train delays and thus delaying our passengers as well. So that's something that we would just want to understand a little bit more if that option were to move forward. But that's in a nutshell where DART stands on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to go to Mr. Maiden.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I know that a lot of work has been done to get us to this point. So thank you to all of those who have worked so hard to get us here today. As I look at this, there's really three things to sort of think through. One was the people that are being impacted. So I always think about gentrification and the people that are living in Fair Park and how our decisions will impact them. I actually think the hybrid approach is spot on. If you think about decisions that were made decades ago, it felt like the city of Dallas turned their back on people in South Dallas. And so here's an opportunity to correct that wrong for the people in Fair Park. The second thing is the hybrid gives you still the connection where people can get to place. And lastly, I would say, which is probably most importantly, is that you have TxDOT and the city of Dallas working in a collaborative format. And we've seen the success of that at Redbird. With the investment that TxDOT has made with the Southern Gateway and the city of Dallas has been very instrumental in seeing that corridor of the city sort of to be revitalized.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Sheets with Downtown Dallas, Inc.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot of different alternatives today. I think it's important to note that Downtown Dallas, Inc. has been involved since very early in this process. We did, through our mobility panel, which is representative of stakeholders, residents within downtown, review each of the alternatives and look at the pros and cons and the impacts to meet the overall planning goal, which Ms. Ryan mentioned, was to look at a better alternative that one day connects those neighborhoods in a better fashion than they're connected now, from downtown to Deep Ellum. I think it was important to DDI and our mobility committee early on that any benefit seen to downtown Deep Ellum or the adjacent communities should not be at the expense of other communities. and therefore we looked toward the recommended alternative for the refined hybrid from TxDOT as an ability to both keep that north-south connectivity from folks in South Dallas to their job, but laying a groundwork and a key groundwork to be able to then restitch the communities at the surface level in a way where that infrastructure no longer exists to the experience of a pedestrian. We, as Deep Ellum did as well, did not fully endorse the refined hybrid. What we did is we said to TxDOT that we want to work with you on this alternative. And we provided a series of 6 recommendations about key design improvements moving forward. We met with Season and TxDOT and her staff. And through our work with I-30 and other facilities, we feel confident that we have the ability to work with them moving forward once they have clarity on an alternative and an alignment to take into advanced design, to work on those key design improvements around pedestrian connectivity, decking opportunities, minimizing the impacts to the investment at Carpenter Park that was just made, as well as creating new opportunity for new development, both above the freeway right-of-way and adjacent on freed up land and space that's currently underutilized and underused. And so our position is to work diligently to secure these design recommendations that we've made to both the agency. And I will say that we've seen that work on I-30 to date at the Canyon with the ability to work with the Council of Governments and attract funding that didn't exist at the time that we looked for decking opportunities, and have seen those move closer and closer to a reality at each design interval. So Downtown Dallas is willing to work very closely with Deep Ellum, with our partners, work with the Council of Governments and the rest of the agencies involved, and continue to make the refined hybrid approach a better and more successful project to truly link the two adjacent communities once split by I-345.
Thank you. And Patrick Kennedy.
Thank you, Ms. Cuellar, and thank you all for coming out on your Monday evening, as well as staff and all the other professionals here, and a special thanks to TxDOT for all their hard work on this. I know this isn't their priority. They spent to rebuild this thing or repair this thing so it can last for another 20 years, but they've been thorough professionals, and we're lucky to have a district and a district engineer that are as collaborative as they are. And I appreciate Mr. Morris's comments today, and of course all of his hard work and vision. And I started writing about this 15 years ago, saying we have to have a conversation about what the city wants to be in 2050. And can we continue to do and build the kind of infrastructure of the 20th century, or should we start building the 21st century infrastructure for a 21st century city, which is multimodal and less car dependent? And frankly, I think that's a conversation worth having. And you know what? I know it sounds crazy, right, to say we want to actually cut a segment of this. But I think it would also sound crazy to say if the crosstown expressways were built across Manhattan, it would be crazy to take those out now too, right? But they were never built, and New York is better off for it. And frankly, highways were never supposed to go through the center of cities, as the Eisenhower administration fought them but lost. So that's why I've tried to throw out this sort of crazy idea to say, is this a beachhead for a longer, broader conversation that has to be more comprehensive and has to be more holistic about building transit and upzoning and allowing for more housing and infill and more density so multimodalism can actually work. So frankly, I think because we're actually lacking economic development data, we're actually lacking environmental impact data, air quality data, and equitable development strategies, because if we're successful, and one version of success is investment coming in, yes, we are at a threat for gentrification. So the question is, do we actually have the right kind of neighborhood stabilization of programs in place to deal with that? So I am actually advocating that we don't move forward. We don't rush through any of these particular options right now, and that instead council should recommend pursuing a Reconnecting Communities grant, a planning grant, so that we can actually bring the federal government and USDOT at play, and we can work through these issues with them to see what the best long-term vision is for the city of Dallas. Thank you.
So I'm going to leave it with you for another moment and 5 minutes for the whole panel. So specific to the boulevard removal option and understanding, as have been explained, the legal process to approve and the financial considerations to the city, how can the $400 million to $1 billion estimated cost for that option be justified?
So 5 minutes for the whole panel? Okay. Well, these are complicated questions that take complex answers. But the first way to justify it is just to look at all the negative externalities around car-dependent infrastructure. The more highway capacity a city or a metro builds, the more driving that happens. The greater the car dependence, the more vehicle miles traveled, the worse the public health outcomes are. The more that we export jobs and tax base outside of the city, because we end up flattening our own density to the similar levels that are out in the suburbs. And we actually we have to differentiate ourselves from the suburbs and build a different kind of infrastructure that we need to celebrate proximity, diversity, culture, and density, and history, which is something that we have as an advantage. We should be celebrating all of these things. The other part of that is it's easy to justify because, as CityMap spelled out in 2016, and I did in 2013 with A New Dallas, is that the removal option had the lowest costs and the highest benefits from new tax base, from new housing, from new jobs creation, and the kind of leverage that the city would actually need to deliver both public good and affordable housing. We haven't been great at delivering mixed income and affordable housing. And I started this when I was doing consulting for Baylor Hospital, and they said two things to me. One, their ambulances couldn't figure out how to get off the limited access highways and actually access the hospital. And two, they needed a lot of housing. They needed housing for their entire hierarchy, from students and janitors up to doctors and admins. And that's when I said, hey, that highway is right there. There's highways being taken out around the country and around the world. We could actually flip the economics to say the private sector could actually price the land here to make the economics work, because too often the land costs are too high and the rents are too low to actually make things work. So in a minute, to allow more time for everybody else, I'll leave it there. Okay, I heard you mention CityMap, which is Susan's domain. I heard you mention Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization, which is David Noguera's domain. Do either of you want to jump in next?
I'll jump in there. Really, the boulevard, it's not an option for us. We stated earlier the impacts of really impacting further communities outside of just the adjacent communities to the interstate. It's something that's a no-go for TxDOT, and therefore it really isn't an option to go forward. I know more studies are being considered, but we spent the last 4 years working very closely with the various city departments, really to take that holistic look, and so that we weren't just looking at the traffic impacts. What is the overall best alternative that we can develop for the interstate? And we believe that we've come to that conclusion over the last 4 years.
Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization or Planning and Urban Design, anything you wish to add in terms of how the cost of removal and the boulevard option could be justified?
The only thing I would say is that we struggle to develop housing, any housing, now. And I struggle to see how fewer partners, fewer dollars at the table will help us further achieve the goals in front of us now.
Is there anybody in agreement with Mr. Kennedy who wants to add?
Just a quick comment.
Yes, Mr. Morris.
I love Patrick's passion. I love his, hey, let's do a study again to see what combination of things would work. I'll move it into, say, climate change. We get people every day saying, well, let's just close all the gas stations and let's get ourselves off of petroleum products, and that'll be the best way to advance, electric vehicles. But electric vehicles have to create electricity, and we got to have clean power plants, or you're not maybe making as much progress as you think. And the interim could be pretty troublesome. So the whole climate change policy is really a way to feather yourself away from petroleum products as a way to get to a cleaner outcome. I have to deal with the reality of what our responsibility is. You have a national government that has a whole bunch of money right now. My board of directors wants to get as much of that money in Dallas-Fort Worth as we can. Chairman Narvaez from the city has challenged us to get as much back for the city of Dallas. The national government wishes to reknit neighborhoods. We think the win-win, and I think Mr. Matthews said, maybe very good is better than trying to get to great if great ends up getting you nowhere. We're the adults in the room here. We're all here on a Monday night. We're the adults. We're the ones that are being asked to give advice to the elected officials. If we could come to grips to argue, let's depress the freeway so we don't have to look at the overhead facility. Let's try to get it fast-tracked along with depressing Interstate 30. Let's get as much of this money as we possibly can. Let's continue to refine the project because we're just at the feasibility stage. Let's rally around the depressed facility. Let's maximize housing and access to parks. Let's get the old band back together that worked on I-30 and see who wishes to build a building on top. What is the cross-section that Season's going to give us so we can have the columns of that building known, and those columns can be built into the roadway project on the outside? How do we reknit the context-sensitive design of the thoroughfare streets? How do we maximize transit? How do we make sure we don't trigger ugly grade separations over the green line because north-south traffic will be depressed? Let's try to create a team. Let's use Patrick's talent and other talent. Okay, we'll put 150,000 people underground or depressed. I'm not saying they're in a tunnel, depressed. And let's see what we can do to really build housing and reknit the community. And I'm dealing with the reality. If we can come together in the month of May, the reality is we could tear down the overhead freeway. If we don't come together and continue to study this to death, we're going to try to get as much money as we possibly can from Washington. It obviously won't be on this project probably. You're going to deal with lots of complicated questions that may or may not ever be resolved. And my fear is 20 years from now, you'll have an overhead freeway that, on my watch, I'm trying to get depressed along with an Interstate 30 so we can bring Fair Park closer to downtown and change forever and materialize a Deep Ellum that is more walkable than you would ever get with all these cars crossing the street. So thank you.
Thank you. So next question is for real estate developers, Mr. Maiden and Mr. Matthews. If I-345 were removed, how would that change your outlook?
Age before beauty. No, I go first here.
I thought it was both.
Kevin hit on some of the things that we would have to consider from an economic development standpoint. One is infrastructure is really important. The second would be zoning and how we can really shape what can happen with these future development opportunities. The interesting thing is that the city, downtown Dallas is 90 acres. So if you look at downtown Dallas as a whole, it's 90 acres. There's a potential of 18 acres for future development. That's about 20% of current downtown. So you think about all the housing that could be created here for this community, the other amenities like parks and connected streets. I think it's a real win for the city.
So not being beautiful and not being young kind of ticks me off. It's really investment, and so and I have to agree with Michael. Patrick, you actually probably by your actions caused this evening to happen, but you caused it to happen 10, 12 years ago. So and I don't want people to stop thinking outside the box, but saying all that, there's going to be a time when fighting more, you actually end up not going as far forward. So really from a developer investment standpoint, I need to know what the future is, and I have to have confidence that cities and states are going to work at a certain level. I don't want to be the experiment. So if I think Dallas is going to experiment with not having highways going through it, and trust me, I can understand a lot of really good reasons why you don't want them there, but then basically what, as an investor, I just step back and I watch. Now, there has been one of these in the Allen Expressway in Toronto, Ontario, where I grew up. It got into the same conversation, and so they stopped the Allen Expressway halfway into downtown and did not connect it to the Gardiner. And as a result, 30 years later, probably 40 years later, it is a mess, and it'll continue to be a mess. So they did this, they experimented. Now, the people that didn't get their land expropriated for the highway, they're very happy, but just about everyone else pays for it in traffic time. So anyway, that's, I get to the end. So if I don't know what's happening, I get scared, and you don't make the investment. So if that's what you're looking for. Did I answer? Sort of, maybe.
Well, I think most importantly, it's the moment all gathered here have been waiting for, which is time for Q&A. So we received some questions online in advance, which I can read if there are not people who want to speak. We have 30 minutes. We have 29 minutes left in this room. So if people would like to stand to speak, you can line up down front, and we'll be quick to give 1 minute for questions and 1 minute for answers to get in as many questions and answers as possible with the time we have left. While I'm waiting for people to queue up, I will ask a question from Adam Lamont. Is it feasible for all of the green potential capping areas to have a cap, or would that trigger fire safety rules? Have there been any studies of the feasibility of capping beyond studying the height over the freeway as noted in the feasibility study?
I can take that one. Yes, it is feasible to cap all of the areas shown in green as referenced in the question. It will need fire and life safety elements, but we know that we can make the geometry work on the main lanes to accommodate those fire and life safety elements. So it is possible to cap everything that we showed in our feasibility study.
Thank you. Okay, if you'll please introduce yourself. You'll press the button on the base. Yes, sir.
Testing. All right. Hi, my name is Hexel, Colorado. I live at 2124 North Garrett here in East Dallas. I have a question about time and values. I had prepared this poster as a visual aid. I am too smart to know that it's not going to look precisely like any of these photos. But I bring it up to remind ourselves of what is the value that we are placing in downtown and what is the cost and time to get there. So when I look at the TxDOT presentation online, as well as what was presented in last year, I saw an estimate of 5 years for construction. And at the end of that timeline, it said highway reopens. And so when we look at the cost of time to build this depressed freeway, what is the cost and time, and what will happen to the traffic and the throughput of not just the cars, but the transit, like the Green Line, that currently runs under 345? Thank you.
Thank you. Susan,
I can take that one. Yeah, so we haven't developed the construction phasing. Really, we're still early on. We just completed the feasibility study. The next step is the schematic environmental. And so after that, then we go into full plans. But at that time, we're going to work with the stakeholders. We're going to keep traffic moving the best that we can during that 5-year construction period like you're talking about. We know that there's a lot of pedestrian activity underneath the freeway, so we've got to find a way to build it and maintain that pedestrian activity. We've got to work with Evan and Stephanie to make sure we're those key access points during construction, that we maintain that so that folks can still get to downtown. So we're still pretty early on in the project development process, but we're going to work towards a solution that we can build it while still maintaining those important connections.
Thank you. I'll ask a follow-up question. And
actually, before you answer a follow-up question, I want to give other people a time to answer and ask.
Oh, is it all right if I just throw the question and leave? I'm not going to take any time.
Okay.
So because we know that the removal or the boulevard option is being ruled out principally because of traffic, but we also know that it may take up to 5 years according to the presentation, If it's found that to build a hybrid would cost immeasurable damage in traffic and congestion, would that change the plans being considered? Right, thank you.
Yeah, and we're going to find a way to build it while still maintaining that traffic. We recently completed our Southern Gateway project, which we were able to keep Interstate 35 moving throughout that construction process. We rebuilt the downtown Mixmaster. We were able to keep traffic moving. And so we're confident that we can rebuild Interstate 345 at a below grade elevation and still keep that traffic moving. So we don't see our solution changing.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Douglas Jacobson. I live in Uptown Dallas, and I appreciate everybody's effort and time and investment in this effort. It's no doubt that I-345 is nearing the end of its life. It's an eyesore, but regardless of what option you choose, it would be ridiculous to not expect additional traffic when half of California has moved to North Texas in the last 2 years, and that they would be bringing cars, and that our children will be having more cars. And one of you mentioned, I think you mentioned the development to the north of us, and that creating more traffic, and the connection between the Port of Houston and North Texas is increasing. And I-35, as we all know, is a transportation corridor that connects the U.S. to Mexico, and the additional truck traffic that comes from there. And the North American Free Trade Agreement has brought more trucks. We've got, no matter what option you choose, if you do not have a room for expansion, you've wasted all the billions of dollars that will go into this project. And so please bear that in mind, that you've got to allow for room for expansion. And if you go to a depressed roadway, it does not guarantee that you're going to bring the communities together. You just look at 75, which is depressed. At Lemon, you have hundreds and thousands of new rental units that have been built in the last 15 years, and it's still not a walkable community. People are not crossing over to the other side. It has not brought that connection. So you're going to have to go to an actual tunnel if you want that connectivity between the two communities. Thank you for your time.
Quick thought, just supporting your point, we're growing at 1 million people every 7 years and have for 3 decades. So the transportation system is important, but I don't want you to think just the roadway system is important. We got to rethink how DART 2.0 can be part of that particular mix as well. So you're absolutely right. We happen to be talking about a roadway project today, but we need to bring all tools to all elements.
Correct. And I think that you've done a great job with the bicycle plan. I know you talk about multimodal. The bike trails are getting pretty crowded. I take the Katy Trail as much as I possibly can. I ride to my office downtown because I live in Uptown. I ride around to the lake and whatnot, although I haven't been lately. But even those are getting crowded now when you get out early in the morning. And whoever had the genius idea of necking down Knox Street to one lane on the eastbound side, while we're increasing density in that area, and there's an additional multi-story development coming in, really wasn't thinking through things, because traffic is now backed up across the Katy Trail into Highland Park.
All right, I see another speaker approaching the microphone.
Yes, I thank you for this opportunity. I see a lot of familiar faces here and many allies and people we've sparred with in the past. It's been a good run. My question is quite simple. I'd like for everyone here to think back to a time, a city that you visited, that you enjoyed, a vacation you took. Think about the good time you had. Maybe it was a honeymoon. Maybe it was that European vacation you'd planned for years. I want you to think back to that city that's in your mind right now and ask yourself, did that city have a freeway running through it?
Thank you. I see another couple of speakers approaching.
Hello, my name is Mark Ishmael. I'm a resident of Dallas. I live near Knox Henderson area. I wanted to speak in favor of a removal option and the boulevard. I know that TxDOT is essentially saying that's a non-option. I'm not surprised by that. There was another Texas Tribune story on a road in San Antonio where they had been working with the community to remove a lane and add, I think, a bike lane in each direction, and that's been nixed because they say they can't reduce vehicle throughput. So I'm speaking more to the people that are beholden to like constituents in the city of Dallas, that the goals in CCAP for mode share shift by 2030 and then further by 2050 aren't facilitated by widening the highway, removing it, and actually reconnecting the streets in a way that facilitates transit, pedestrians, and bikes is what's best for the residents of Dallas, both from a mobility, connectivity standpoint, and then for economic development, there's a lot of potential, and also it's the best option for health, for the environment, and that affects the region as well. That's all.
Thank you. Next speaker, or question rather. I know that we've said speaker.
For the record, I just have to say the freeway isn't being widened. It's the same number of lanes before and after.
Hello, my name is Ed Zara, 1003 Valencia, Dallas. I've attended almost all of these TxDOT meetings since 2016, the city map, and I've heard, like everyone else, all the input from citizens, from TxDOT staff, all the options, and it's clear to me that the hybrid option is the plan to go with. We must realize that I-345 is not just a Dallas asset, it's a regional and a national asset. You can go from Galveston straight through to Canada. We're one of the biggest logistics centers in the United States, and it's an important link that we must do. My question is to some city council members, why do you think it's necessary to spend more taxpayer dollars and more time to get another consultant to give us more of the same research? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for the question. I will say this was not a posted council meeting. We do have a quorum here, so we need to avoid any discussion by elected officials. However, there will be a briefing for council members at the Transportation Committee on May the 15th, and there will also be discussion of this issue at the full meeting of the City Council on May the 17th. So you are also urged to communicate with Transportation Committee and council members in advance of those discussions, but they will not be able to speak to your question this evening. Thank you. Yes, sir.
This didn't dawn on me until now, but we're talking about like capping the road. This road 180,000 people use. We're talking about building housing there, but do we want housing right next to a road that carries 180,000? I mean, the caps might absorb the noise, but there's still a pollution. That's a lot of cars. I don't think that these freeways are working well. I normally take DART to get around, but recently my friends did take me to Arlington and Waxahachie. It's a mess. That whole freeway loop's a mess. We're spending billions of dollars and millions on potential caps. What if we just use that and made it easier to get around without a car so you wouldn't have to deal with traffic in the first place? I don't understand why we're assuming we need to move the same number of cars that we do now in the future.
Thank you. Is anyone interested in speaking to that? If not, we'll take another question.
Hello, Andrew Hansen. All right, so I didn't know, the city of Dallas downtown is 90 acres. I wasn't sure about that, but so 90 acres, and we've got a 25-acre, spot in the form of 345. I mean, we've got an opportunity to expand our downtown by 30%. I think Dallas has we're in a pretty porous debt situation. I think per capita, we're the 8th highest in the country. We need tax revenue. We need to expand the tax base. We didn't talk about that here, but I question, how, Austin wants more transportation through Dallas, how that somehow, helps our city more than, this massive tax revenue base that could be expanded and, made into a great neighborhood, in addition to making Deep Ellum a larger part of downtown, which would, expand the tax base even further. So curious, thoughts on the debt situation and how we could use this to solve that problem.
Would any of the panelists like to speak to the debt situation? Mr. Morris?
Well, I don't want to speak to the debt situation, but the caller is right. The whole purpose of developing a system integration of transportation and economic development is to do it as a system. We just built a Southern Gateway freeway. There's lots of places to develop by Redbird. I pray to God we develop density around the pedestrian cap at the zoo. The Clyde Warren Park was very successful. We have 2 more pedestrian caps coming in on I-30. Jack Matthews is building a building over Interstate 30. So it would be nice to see increased density in Dallas. I need more infill development in the center of the region. That's why the RTC is probably going to spend $5 billion rebuilding the inner core of downtown to create economic development, because I can't let the region, develop to the Red River. It's not sustainable. I need more development within DART service area communities. But at the end of the day, people just don't wish themselves to transit. You're going to have 150,000 people, a whole bunch of trucks who can't take transit, finding their way through a thoroughfare street system that I don't think will maximize the economic development that you're hoping for. So is it a better balance? Is it a better balance to have the through trips be on a different plane and then reestablish this human scale elements like Clyde Warren Park, like Interstate 30, like at the pedestrian cap at the zoo, and take that whole set of initiatives to depressing Interstate 30 at Fair Park, bring back the Fair Park link as part of that whole process. But this isn't the only part of Dallas that you could build a whole bunch of more housing in.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll chime in very quickly. I would agree that, when you're dealing with any kind of sort of urban projects, there's always going to be all sorts of sort of competing interests and pros and cons, and the goal is always, how do you get to not necessarily win-wins for everybody, but how do you get to as many wins as possible? And to me, you have to set up a system of priorities. And to me, the number one priority facing the city is lack of tax base and the north-south divide. And when I first pitched the idea to Wick Allison, it was that decking 30 is not going to attract the investment to jump across all the way down to South Dallas in a way that we have to steer it, because investment is inherently conservative. And so we have to open up sort of these vessels, right, for new investment by opening up land. And to me, I think we do have to spread out that traffic, because there's countless histories about high rises over highways in Harlem or whatnot, that they had tremendously difficult times keeping residents in there because of the noise and the pollution coming out of there. And the U.S. DOT even says traffic over 125,000 on a corridor causes negative public health outcomes. So to me, I think we should be trying to spread that traffic around by corridor, by region, sending the stuff that's not coming through the city around the city, and by mode. The mode takes the longest time to happen, but you need to have it on the surface street corridors that add the density to then transform how it's actually getting around. So to me, I think we need the Van Nesses and the Michigan Avenues and the Wilshire Boulevards that are moving 30, 40, 50,000 cars per day, that have some of the most high-value real estate in the country, And then you see Van Ness, they're now moving 25,000 on a BRT corridor, which used to carry 45,000 cars. So to me, I think that's the way that we should be thinking in terms of long-term. So I know I'm outnumbered here on the board, on this horseshoe on that matter, though.
Yes, sir.
I think it's, oh, here we go. All right. I think we're asking the wrong question here. So why do we need a highway at the first place? Well, it's because we need to get to work or get back home. So why don't we build on the communities like South Dallas? Because there's no businesses there. There's nothing there. I work in the South Dallas area, and there's just nothing there because it's based off of zoning laws and codes. They won't allow for building there, and everybody has to go to North Dallas to find a job, literally. So I think in the city level, if you want to do something, citywide, local level, work on those zoning laws and fixing those codes. In state level, we just need to find a way to make it more multimodal, because there's going to be a lot of ways we can fix this. It's a very complex thing, not just a simple, let's just build a highway. That's pretty much it.
Thank you. And Director Ryan, do you want to talk about how people can get involved in Forward Dallas?
Yes, thank you. So right now we are working on Forward Dallas, which is our future land use vision for the city. We have a lot of public meetings going on right now. So there's one going on this evening, the rest of the week, and for the rest of the month. And I would urge you all to get involved with that effort. It's really about defining and understanding what the city should look like in 10, 20 years, and being able to provide the implementation measures that will help us to get there. Separately, we are working on a redo of the Dallas Development Code, and this is really meant to support the efforts of Forward Dallas, as well as modernize and simplify the city's zoning code so we can actually get to a lot of the things that we're looking for with a fast process, and with getting a lot of the missing middle housing and other kinds of things that we really need to get in the city to be able to provide for the level of development that we need.
Thank you. I'll take a question from Mr. Tranchen.
Hey everyone, my name is Matt Tranchen. Good to see you all.
Can you make sure that your mic is on and that you're speaking into it? Thanks.
Is this better? Excellent. Hello everyone, my name is Matt Tranchen. It's good to see you all. About half a century ago, Eric Johnson I created Goals for Dallas. There are 12 pillars to really help guide our city, guide our region. Transportation, housing, education were some of those pillars. So was design of the city. And I think that's what we're trying to talk about now. This isn't a transportation challenge and solution. It's how do we redesign the 9th largest city in the country in a way that addresses our greatest needs. Because, you know, as Mr. Morris said, we need to confront reality. The reality is our city is struggling. We've got a housing crisis, specifically a workforce housing crisis. We have a need for jobs. We have to expand our tax base. CityMap identified an opportunity to create tens of thousands of jobs, over 10,000 residential units, billions of dollars of increased tax base. That was a CityMap study facilitated by TxDOT. And I think what we're struggling with right now is why we're choosing to move forward on a solution that is not addressing our greatest needs. So and this is the question I actually have for TxDOT or COG. One of the factors for consideration is the health hazard that highways pose. Many studies have shown if you live, work, or play within a couple hundred yards of a highway, chances of developing cardiovascular diseases, suffering from strokes go up astronomically. Given that, has that been a factor or consideration in looking at alternatives for the I-345 corridor that otherwise could be used to address the greatest issues in our city? Thank you.
So there are 6 regulated pollutants that is established in the Clean Air Act. We're in compliance with 5 of them. One of them is not ozone. One of them is ozone. There's 2 precursors to ozone, volatile organic compounds and nitrogen oxides. It's the responsibility of the state of Texas to comply with that particular strategy. I think if you look at our monthly reports at the RTC, terrific progress from 5 years ago to 20 years ago. And we're challenging the state that I don't believe their air chemistry models are right. During COVID, when we had a collapse of vehicle miles of travel, it was a great experiment for them. And we didn't see any improvement in our ozone levels. So vehicle miles of travel is way down, air traffic was cut back 98%, transit ridership fell by 70%. Yet we didn't see any of those particular improvements. I think all of us should embrace climate change. We're going after $1 million of funds to develop an aggressive climate change program. I believe a lot of these emissions are collinear. So as you develop strategies on particulates, which we're in attainment for, they're collinear to VOCs, they're collinear to nitrogen oxides, and they're collinear to carbon dioxide. We need to move to more multimodal transportation investments. We got to develop infill policies. Some of us have invested $40, $50 million in pedestrian caps in the southern sector to encourage growth. Season and I have invested $100 million in access to Redbird Mall to create development on Interstate 20 because we felt 635 shouldn't have frontage roads when Interstate 20 didn't have frontage roads. So those are the type of things that we're doing. More emission control readers are going in across the region with regard to particulates and other strategies. I think we should all be very aggressive with regard to our air quality response. But some of us have to wake up and respond to 1 million people every 7 years. And I came here and we're 3 million, and now we just crossed 8 million, and we're on our way to 11.5 million. And some of us under federal law have to develop a transportation system for 2045. I can't look out the window and say, you know what, everything's going to be okay. I got to look out the window at 2045 and stand here in 2023 and develop those transportation elements where we're connecting the dots, as you saw in this presentation, to hopefully create an environment to rebuild the economic development of the inner core. And we think, hopefully we're right, by building pedestrian caps, by taking overhead freeways down, by reknitting communities, we pray that increased development is going to come to the southern sector and to the I-30 corridor as part of moving forward. And if doing so, then maybe a resident of the southern sector doesn't have to cross the river to go to a job in the industrial district. When we can get more employment in the southern sector and more work housing in the southern sector. My biggest issue at the double iPod at the intermodal facility is I have no housing. I need a whole bunch of housing south of Interstate 20 because the employment's going through the roof. And what am I doing? I'm investing in millions of dollars of transit investment to DART to get people waking up in the city of Dallas to go to jobs in the southern sector when I need more housing in the southern sector to reduce that amount of transportation. So air quality is very important. Safety is very important. I sit on the statewide safety task force. I'm struggling with pedestrians in Deep Ellum crossing 100,000, 150,000 cars a day. I'm worried about queue lanes where cars are stuck on the railroad tracks of a green line because the volumes are too high. So I'm seeking, no different than you, I'm seeking win-win solutions to try to pull together the best we possibly can to move forward.
With the last minute we have left, there's one other person who just moved to the front row. I'd like to, there's 3 guys in the front row. 4, okay. Well, it looks like you've been voted to give the last question, sir.
All right. So my name is Parsa. I live in Oak Lawn and work in South Oak Cliff in the Redbird area. I see merits in both approaches, but it does seem there are still a lot of unanswered questions to both sides, which is why I think a third-party analysis is warranted. My question is specifically regarding the TxDOT's recommendation as it pertains to the decking. In my mind, as I look at this potential project, the more decking that we can have kind of obviously is more palatable to how I would like this city to look. And I saw there, I think 269 million was the estimated cost to the city of Dallas to fund the debt caps. I'm curious to what degree that 269 million would cover. You know, and would that 269 million be just a little bit of debt capping, or would that be a lot more? And furthermore, what sort of, you know, density could we expect to see developed upon those decks? I mean, is it feasible to see another Clyde Warren Park type thing, or, you know, how can we maybe expect that to look?
Let's go over them very quickly. Clyde Warren Park Phase 1, largely paid for by TxDOT. And yes, we're proposing more Clyde Warren Parks. Clyde Warren Park Phase 2, largely being funded by our office at the Regional Transportation Council. The federal government, we have an application in there, and city bond program around $10 million. Phase 1 at the zoo, $40 million Regional Transportation Council, $10 million City of Dallas, partnership with TxDOT, built as part of the freeway. Everything on top will be paid for by the private sector. $7 million Phase 2 engineering already funded. Phase 2 application already in Washington. Make hay while the sun shines, get the pattern. Interstate 30 team working with DDI in the city of Dallas. Pedestrian cap at the convention center, largely paid for with the funds that the voters approved. Building next door just east of Lamar, private sector building paid for by the private sector. Application in Washington, D.C. for the Three Fingers Plus, with money being started by the Regional Transportation Council, engineering funds being paid for as part of the convention center, federal application sitting in Washington to pay for it. Rinse and repeat. Take that team, take those same individuals, same actors, rotate it 90 degrees, and bring the dance to 345.
So that's a regional answer, and I do want to again share the website for the Forward Dallas Land Use Plan and Opportunities for Public Engagement, which is dallascityhall.com/forwarddallas, and remind everyone that the Transportation Committee will be discussing this May 15th, and the full council will be briefed on May 17th. Thank you all for your time, your attention, and your thoughtful dialogue tonight. Those who are able can stick around to visit, and be safe on your way home. Thank you.